A loaf of bread lies half buried beneath a tumbled slab of masonry, its surface still dusted with flour and charred at the edges where heat seared through the ash that fell like snow. It rests just beyond the threshold of what was once a small shop, its doorway collapsed inward, framing the scene like an old photograph caught mid-fall. The bread is not part of some grand ritual or elite offering. It's ordinary, unremarkable in form, yet it holds the weight of a life interrupted. Nearby, a clay lamp lies on its side, its wick long since extinguished, and beside it a child's sandal, its leather worn thin from use, tucked beneath a wooden shelf that once held foodstuffs. The air is still, not because there is no breath left in the city, but because time has settled into this moment, this precise, fleeting instant when the earth opened, the sky darkened, and everything stopped moving. In the streets beyond, a man's footprints are pressed deep into ash that harden like cement. The impression of his stride is clear, as if he turned too late, caught mid-step in an effort to reach shelter or family. A single finger has been traced across a wall near the entrance of what was once a bathhouse. Just a name, hastily scratched, Vesuvius. Not a monument, not a decree, but a whisper left behind by someone who once walked here, loved, feared, lived. The city is not silent. It speaks in fragments. The sliver of a coin beneath the rubble, the outline of a wooden chair still preserved in ash, the faint impression of hands gripping a basket. These are not relics of emperors or gods. They are things that belong to people who woke each morning with their own small routines, bought bread at dawn, walked past shops selling fish and wine, left notes on walls, tended gardens behind houses where fig trees still grow in the cracks. Pompeii is not just a ruin, it is a museum of ordinary life, preserved not by design but by disaster, each object a quiet testament to what was real before the sky fell. In the summer of 79 AD, beneath a sky that seemed ordinary in its stillness, life pulsed through the streets of Pompeii, a city nestled in the fertile crescent of southern Italy's Bay of Naples, cradled between volcanic slopes and the restless Mediterranean. It was not Rome itself, nor even one of her great provincial capitals, but a thriving urban center with around 15,000 souls, merchants, artisans, farmers, freedmen, slaves, living in close quarters beneath an ancient volcano whose breath had been long dormant. The city sprawled across the lower slopes of Mount Vesuvius, its streets laid out in grid patterns that reflected Roman planning's precision and ambition. Homes lined the roads like teeth in a jaw, some grand with mosaic floors and frescoed walls, others modest dwellings of stone and timber where families gathered around hearths and shared meals from earthenware bowls. Pompeii was not merely an outpost, it was a place shaped by trade, culture, and the rhythms of daily labor. Its markets buzzed with fishmongers hawking salted mackerel, bakers kneading dough in clay ovens, and scribes copying texts on wax tablets under awnings of cloth stretched between poles. The air carried the scent of baking bread, drying fish, and the faint tang of lime from construction sites where new buildings rose beside ancient ones. This was a city alive with commerce and community, where children played near fountains, where neighbors exchanged gossip over shared doorways, where the gods were invoked and prayers whispered before meals. Yet for all its vitality, Pompeii existed on the edge of empire's reach. It had been shaped by Roman expansion and civil wars, rebuilt after earthquakes, enriched through maritime trade with Greece and North Africa. But even as it flourished, a sleeping giant stirred beneath the earth, its breath drawing closer each day. And when that breath finally came, it did not arrive with warning, but with silence. The city's final moments were preserved in ash, not just of fire, but of time itself, frozen mid-breath. Beneath the ash lies a city frozen in time, not just its buildings, but the fragile details of daily life preserved with startling clarity. Volcanic surge that buried Pompeii did so with such speed and completeness that organic matter, once thought lost to decay, was locked within layers of pumice and tuff. This ashy tomb created an environment where wood, leather, textiles, even food and human remains could persist for nearly 2,000 years. Excavations began in the 18th century, guided by careful trenching and stratigraphic recording, revealing streets still paved with cobblestones, shops with wooden counters and jars of olive oil, kitchens with hearths and charred bread. These are not reconstructions, they are direct remnants of lived experience. Forensic archaeology reveals much through the casts made from voids left by decomposed bodies. Molds of hands clutching stones, faces contorted in final breaths, children curled against their parents. Radiocarbon dating of plant fragments and wood confirms the timing of the eruption with precision, anchoring events within a known historical window. Scientific analysis of human skeletons shows patterns of trauma consistent with sudden collapse, while dental records and isotopic studies suggest some inhabitants were migrants from distant regions, evidence not just of survival, but of movement across the Roman world. Graffiti on walls offers another kind of record, not official or grand, but personal and immediate. Painted names, political slogans, romantic declarations, even casual insults, these inscriptions speak to a society with its own rhythms and voices. They are fragile, yes, but their presence in preserved plaster gives them enduring form. The city's layout, its grid pattern, the distribution of shops, homes, baths, and public spaces is mapped through surveying and digital modeling, revealing social patterns hidden beneath stone. Yet not all is certain. Some inscriptions remain undeciphered. Many rooms are still unexcavated. The reliability of these sources rests on their context, how well they were preserved, how carefully excavated, and the cautious interpretation required when translating ash into memory. What survives is both an archive and a mystery, offering not just facts but fragments of lives once lived with urgency and intimacy. In the quiet aftermath of ash, Pompeii's streets breathe with the rhythm of lives once lived in haste and habit. A baker's shop lies frozen, mid-trade scales tipped to one side, clay loaves stacked beside a hearth where fire still smolders beneath blackened crusts. The oven door is half open, as if the baker stepped away for breath, perhaps to call his son or check on dough rising in a stone trough. Nearby, a fishmonger's stall holds not just shells and scales, but a small wooden tray with fragments of a sea bream. Its spine still intact, its eye socket hollowed out by time and ash. These were no grand banquets, they were meals for families who measured their days in bread baked at dawn, oysters gathered from the bay, lentils boiled slow over coals. In homes that never saw sunlight again, a woman's mirror rests beside a clay water jar, her handprint still faintly pressed into the soft soil where she once wiped her face. A child's sandal lies near a doorframe, worn thin at the sole, as if it had been walked on for years before death came in silence. In a kitchen courtyard, 2 stones stand upright. One holds a small iron knife, the other cradles a clay cup shaped like a bird with wings folded over its back. Not ritual, but use. This was where bread was sliced and meals were shared under an open sky. Graffiti on walls tells of love letters scrawled in haste, Silix adores series, and warnings scribbled beside doors. Beware the dogs. One name is repeated with care over a shop entrance, not as a sign, but as memory. Man's footprint presses into soft ash near an alleyway, frozen mid-stride, his pace quickened by fear or urgency. In these ruins there are no heroes. Only people who woke before light, walked to work in the same sandals worn for years, returned home with food and fatigue, and rested. The city did not die with a scream, it ended with breath held too long. And what remains is not just stone and ash, but proof that ordinary life, lived in sweat and silence, was beautiful enough to be preserved. The true power of Pompeii lies not in its grandeur, but in what it reveals about ordinary life, lived, labored, and loved within the rhythms of a city frozen in time. The eruption did not discriminate. It preserved the baker's flour sack just as surely as it captured the dust of an artisan's tools. This is where history becomes intimate. In the chipped edge of a kitchen mortar, the charred remains of a loaf left half baked on a hearth, or a child's sandal buried beside a doorframe. These are not artifacts from a museum display, they are fragments of lived existence, unmediated by the hand of memory or record. The city did not stop breathing in its final moments, it simply ceased to move forward. And so we inherit not just ruins, but evidence of life's quiet persistence. A woman's hairpin found beneath debris, her jewelry still caught in the ash, a shopkeeper's ledger, pages fused together by heat and time. The presence of graffiti names scrawled on walls, jokes, political jabs, lovers' declarations, suggests a society that spoke openly, debated fiercely, and connected personally even as it endured daily drudgery. What is most striking is the tension between what was known and what remains hidden. We understand the social order through architectural layout, the larger homes with atria facing the street, the modest shops tucked into alleyways, yet we cannot know which voices were silenced by the ash, whose stories never reached a scribe's wax tablet. The fear in the final moments is not just in the posture of those caught mid-flight, but in what they left behind: unpacked luggage, abandoned tools, half-eaten meals. This is not merely an archaeological site, it is a threshold into the human condition, how people navigate routine, express identity, endure threat, and remember one another. The ash preserved not only bodies but intention, the desire to live, love, work, belong. In Pompeii's stillness lies the echo of ordinary lives that continue to matter long after they ended. The first tremors came not with sound but with silence, a hush that settled over streets already thick with dust and heat. The air grew still, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Then the ground began to shift beneath feet and foundations, slow at first, then with increasing urgency. What had been an ordinary afternoon in Pompeii became something else entirely. Not yet catastrophe, but warning. The evidence is fragmented: a child's sandal kicked aside in haste, a jar overturned mid-pour, a loaf of bread half-baked on the hearth. These are not artifacts of ritual or ceremony, but traces of interruption. People did what they knew how to do: flee, shelter, seek safety. Yet no one seems to have known where to go. The evacuation was neither coordinated nor orderly. Some ran toward open spaces. Others retreated into homes, believing walls would hold back the sky. The true turning came not in a single moment, but in a sequence of collapses and surges. Ash fell like snow, then turned to rain. Hot ash that scalded skin, filled lungs. The air thickened with dust so dense it choked even those who had reached shelter. Some bodies were found curled around doorways, as if trying to block the smoke with their own frames. Others lay frozen mid-motion, a hand still clutching the handle of a jar, a child's small foot caught in the edge of a doorway. The city did not simply die, it was buried alive, layer upon layer, each deposit sealing what had been left behind. The transformation was absolute but subtle. Streets became trenches, houses became tombs, lives were preserved, not as monuments, but as echoes in plaster and ash. What remains is less the record of a disaster than the fragile residue of ordinary acts interrupted. A baker's dough rising in an oven that would never be lit again, a wall covered in chalked names and jokes, a garden path worn smooth by feet now long gone. And yet, even as death came swiftly, it left behind something unexpected, not just ruin but memory. The city was silenced, yes, but not erased. What we see is not the end of Pompeii, but the moment when time stopped and ordinary life became fossilized in its final breaths. Not everything uncovered beneath the ash is certain, and some of what feels like revelation may be myth dressed as fact. The image of Pompeii preserved in a single instant, frozen mid-flight, caught between breaths, is compelling, but it's not quite accurate. No two bodies were laid down at precisely the same moment. Their positions reflect different movements, choices, even attempts to survive. Some skeletons show signs of trauma that suggest violence rather than pure suffocation. Evidence of a panicked response, perhaps from collapsing buildings or fleeing crowds. The idea that Pompeii was an untouched time capsule is misleading. After the eruption, scavengers returned. Looters stripped homes of valuables. Later inhabitants repurposed ruins for new structures. What we see today is not pristine but layered, a palimpsest written over in haste and time. There are also persistent myths about social order that the ash seems to confirm at a glance. The notion that Pompeii was perfectly ordered, with clear class divisions visible through house size or decoration, overlooks nuance. Wealth didn't always mean grandeur. Some small homes featured exquisite frescoes, while others of greater scale had modest adornments. Status wasn't only measured in architecture, it was tied to occupation, lineage, and social networks that leave no stone unturned. Graffiti, often romanticized as candid confessions or public records of daily life, can be misread. Some inscriptions were artistic doodles, others are political slogans with uncertain intent. The famous "Venus is a whore" may be satire rather than truth. We cannot assume that every word scratched into plaster was spoken by an ordinary person. Some were added centuries later, even during the Roman Empire's decline. And finally, despite our ability to reconstruct rooms and rituals, we remain unsure of how many lived here before the eruption, or who they truly were beyond their titles and inscriptions. The names on walls are not full biographies. The bodies are anonymous without context. What survives is fragmentary: a kitchen with charred bread, a mosaic of unknown meaning, an urn bearing no name. We must honor what we know, but also admit how much remains uncertain. What endures is not just the city's shape, but its quiet insistence on being seen as lived, and not merely a ruin, but an archive of breath and routine. The ash did not erase life, it sealed it in time, preserving what centuries might have worn away: the scent of bread baking in a hearth, the groove of sandals worn thin on cobblestones, the words scrawled across walls, names, jokes, warnings. These fragments are not relics of grandeur, but proof that ordinary moments matter. A kitchen corner with charred grain, and a spoon still caught mid-stir. A garden wall where ivy once climbed and children once played. A doorway framed by faded paint that once held the threshold of someone's morning ritual. We are moved not because Pompeii was destroyed, but because it was preserved in its final breath. The ash did not distinguish between noble and humble, just as life had not. A freedman's house holds traces of his trade, a mother's care for her child, a man who once paused to write on the wall before running toward the hills. These are not stories from history books, they are echoes of people whose names may be lost but whose lives were real. What remains is more than archaeology, it is humanity's persistence in the face of collapse. The city did not vanish into silence, it speaks through fragments: a footprint left in ash, a coin tucked inside a purse, a child's drawing on plaster. These are not spectacles, they are intimacies, evidence that people made choices, felt fear, loved, and hoped just as we do. And so it matters, not because Pompeii is perfect or complete, but because it reminds us how fragile our own lives are, and how much of ourselves we may leave behind in the quiet details of daily living. The city still whispers, not with grand declarations, but in the hush between breaths, in the warmth that lingered long after the last flame went out,